Last month, we got an indication that Resident Evil 9 will be announced right around the corner. And just days ago, we got a massive new leak regarding story, gameplay, and other features pertaining to the next mainline entry in the Resident Evil series. Unsurprisingly, there's some pushback from these new leaks from a longtime Resident Evil leaker, so consider this video to be the ultimate news dump surrounding everything new circulating about the next mainline Resident Evil game. We're diving deep into this new information, looking at how the extensive new leaks holds up against the existing information we've learned about the title throughout the several years of documented leaks, while also addressing the leaks pushback. So if you're itching for a deep dive of both extensive new information and seeing how it holds up to existing information about Resident Evil 9, you are in the right place. We've got a lot to go over, so shoot that like button if you're digging all this new information about Resident Evil 9. Let us all know in the comments what your thoughts are on all the stuff going on with this game. Just know going forward that there will be tons of new information that, should it come true, could spoil certain aspects of the game. Just want to throw that out there before we dive right in. Plus, if you're not into entertaining speculation, leaks, and rumors, this is not the video for you, as none of this has been publicly confirmed by Capcom. With Metacritic having launched their listing for Resident Evil 9 a few weeks ago, many are speculating that this is a definite sign for an upcoming reveal of the game, with most agreeing that an official reveal at the Game Awards in December is likely the event will get that announcement. With Metacritic also having listed titles like Resident Evil 4 Gold Edition a month ahead of that version's reveal, it's likely we will learn more about this next mainline Resident Evil game in an official capacity in due time. But even while we wait, we've got some massive new leaks to go over, detailing tons of features pertaining to this next Resident Evil title, and this information comes from Declassified. Keep in mind, Declassified also disclosed information regarding that Resident Evil 1 remake rumor that blew up earlier this year, and while we have no idea if RE1 is truly getting another remake, just know going forward that this information pertaining to RE9 may turn out to be completely false, so as long as you're open to rumors and some unconfirmed information about this game, you're likely to get some mileage with it. All this information was disclosed from a recent playtester who had time with the game in April and September earlier this year in Japan. To start, let's first talk about the game's characters. Both Jill Valentine and Leon S. Kennedy are said to be the main characters in Resident Evil 9. Interestingly corroborating what we saw in the placeholder art for PlayAsia's listing of the game that went up in early June. While Jill and Leon are said to be the main playable characters in Resident Evil 9, apparently Chris Redfield and Barry Burton serve as supporting characters here. Chris Redfield has been present throughout the last several mainline Resident Evil games, but Barry Burton? Man, I'd be more than happy to see him here in Resident Evil 9 after all this time, but let's get back on track. Jill Valentine is said to be dressed more tactically in this game, reflecting an appearance similar to that of her look in the Resident Evil 5 Lost in Nightmares DLC, while Leon's look reflects something closer to his appearance in Resident Evil Damnation. While Jill will be looking decidedly younger like her appearance in Resident Evil Death Island, Leon is said to be looking much older. Alright, so we've got both Jill and Leon as main playable characters here. Plus, we have Chris Redfield and Barry Burton as supporting characters so far. But as for the setting, well, Resident Evil 9 is said to be taking place 4 years after the events of Resident Evil Village, and we are talking about the core campaign of RE Village covering Ethan Winters' saga, and not the one that takes place a number of years in the future with the Shadow of Rose DLC. According to the playtester, Resident Evil 9 will represent the closing act of the Resident Evil 7 Biohazard and Resident Evil Village story with the Megamycete, so while the Winters saga seems to have come to a close in the last two games, Resident Evil 9 will serve as the last entry in this trifecta of Megamycete-centric entries, punctuating the finale of this arc. With Jill Valentine of the BSAA, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, and Leon S. Kennedy of the DSO, the Division of Security Operations under the jurisdiction of the United States federal government, the pair link up to investigate an island where the organization who created Eveline resides. While not listed in this leak, this organization is likely referring to the Connections, who developed the first E-type bioweapon, E-001 known as Evelyn by using a sample of the mold supplied by Miranda, along with a sample of DNA from Miranda's daughter Eva. This bit likely intrinsically ties much of Resident Evil 7 and 8 to the plot here in Resident Evil 9. Getting back to the plot of RE9, this company on the island is said to be creating mass clones of Evelyn with the Megamycete, and it's our job as Jill and Leon to bring this whole operation down. Both Chris Redfield and Barry Burton's support is said to come in the form of radio calls, with one of these calls mentioning Rosemary Winters, Ethan Winters' daughter. While we don't know the population nor the location of the island the game is said to be taking place, this all-star cast of RE protagonists is said to use Rose's blood to serve as a vaccine to rid the Megamycete infection. And speaking of, Jill and Leon are both said to eventually become infected with the Megamycete. Blue Umbrella is also mentioned to be making a return here in Resident Evil 9. As for what the island has in store for us insofar as locations, an abandoned hospital, caves, abandoned houses, a dark forest, an abandoned factory, a laboratory, and a temple were mentioned as being locations from the playtest. More specifically, Jill Valentine's section was said to have taken place in an abandoned hospital during the April playtest, whereas Leon's September playtest took place in the dark forest area. Let's now talk about the kinds of threats that were said to have been encountered by the playtester. Similar to the Ganados in Resident Evil 4, the main enemies here in Resident Evil 9 were said to be evolved zombies that can use melee weapons. They worship the moon and have moon tattoos on their arms, which reflects some of the earlier leaks about the title, preliminarily referred to as Resident Evil Apocalypse, placing great importance on the moon cycles, and most importantly, the 9th moon cycle. These enemies are said to be heard singing to the moon while looking out at sea, further corroborating the game's potential importance of the moon in Resident Evil 9. The antagonist is said to be a man called Mr. Simon, and while his motivations and persona weren't fleshed out from this playtester, other big threats are said to be in the game as well, including the final thing mentioned from this playtester being a persistent enemy that will be stalking Leon, while another enemy, the Goat Man, is said to be after Jill. The potential return of a persistent enemy has been a common thread throughout the last two mainline Resident Evil entries, with Jack Baker and Lady Dimitrescu of Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8 respectively serving as those titles' more memorable villains. Let me know if you're happy to see more stalker enemies come to Resident Evil 9 in the comments, because while I've had no issue with them in these Resident Evil games, I hope their presence is limited to specific locations rather than a persistent island-wide threat. As someone who's covered the rather robust history of leaks pertaining to Resident Evil 9 over the years, a lot of talk has been surrounding the game's format, with another prominent Resident Evil leaker, Dusk Golem, repeatedly claiming over the years that Resident Evil 9 will be an open-world title, stating that this game is by far the most ambitious of the series, no doubt likely due to the potential for it to be an open-world game. Circling back to the persistent enemies for a second, I just hope that these threats don't have free reins to stalk you down throughout the island. Having these stalker sections take place in isolated spots is more to my liking, but I'm happy to hear, if true, that such enemies like a Mr. X or Jack Baker are present here, and again, let me know your thoughts on all this in the comments. Speaking of Dusk Golem, this guy has been known to have a thing or two to say and leak regarding Resident Evil projects with varying degrees of success, and unsurprisingly here, he has a bit to say about the new leaks that surfaced from Declassified. In his first post, he mentions that he finds the rumor surrounding the hospital and Goatman stalker enemy to be untrue, going further in his second post to reiterate that his current understanding of things happening with Resident Evil 9 is from older information, claiming that he's now working with outdated info. Earlier this year, Dusk claimed that Resident Evil 9 was delayed, mentioning the possibility that instead of a 2025 release date, that perhaps another Resident Evil game would launch in its stead in 2025, leaving 2026 as Resident Evil 9's likely release date. He has gone back and forth on this, claiming that RE9 would be adhering to its planned 2025 launch schedule before flipping to a 2026 release date, so it's safe to say that Dusk doesn't have a firm idea when Resident Evil 9 will be releasing. With all his claims, he concludes his second post by stating that this new information surrounding the hospital setting with the Goatman persistent enemy doesn't line up with the information he currently has, stating, quote, "It reeks of BS to me." Again, my friends, Dusk Golem's statements, along with this playtester leak, are simply just rumors and leaks at this point, with no way of confirming the validity of this without having any firm information provided by Capcom. So regarding both these leakers, treat them as unconfirmed leaks for now. That said, Dusk didn't comment on the other rumors regarding the main characters, supporting characters, story, and other aspects mentioned from these leaks. So again, we gotta wait for Capcom to officially reveal the game and announce information before we go ahead and assume all this info is true. But go ahead and let me know your thoughts about what Dusk has to say about this current leak in the comments. Getting back to the information from the playtester, I'm also curious to learn more about the player perspective of Resident Evil 9. With Resident Evil 7 and 8 both being in the first-person perspective, I'm curious to see if Resident Evil 9 will continue that trend, seeing that, should this leak come true, this game will be serving as the conclusion of the Mega Mycete saga. Outside of the open world stuff and the player perspective talk that was absent from this recent playtester leak, there are a lot of striking similarities between this leak and the earliest of leaks regarding what was first known as Resident Evil 9 Apocalypse. Those initial leaks claimed that abandoned homes, forests, and caves were all to be featured in RE9, along with enemies that take on more of a human form like the Ganados, that have the capacity to utilize weapons. With an open world format potentially hitting this game and seeing the return of two of the series' more popular Resident Evil protagonists, along with even more big names seen in supporting roles, Resident Evil 9 certainly appears to be one of the most ambitious Resident Evil games yet, and I'm honestly all for it, considering these leaks turn out to be true. There is a lot to unpack here, but now I'm turning it over to you, so let me know what your thoughts are regarding these comments made by the playtester as documented by Declassified. Are you encouraged by these leaks? Are you disappointed with what was mentioned? I'd also like to mention that these leaks don't reflect the entirety of this game, even if they were to come true. Perhaps there may be even more playable characters, locations, game modes, and heck, even VR functionality, as Capcom has publicly stated earlier this year that they hope to see more Resident Evil titles feature VR. Regardless, I'm hoping we see this game in an official capacity real soon in the coming weeks, but if you just can't get enough survival horror while we wait, join me over here in this video as we rank all the Silent Hill games from least scary to the absolute scariest game in that series. That's all I've got for you here in this one. I'll be seeing you real soon in the next one.